Priscilla Davidson.
Here.
Elizabeth Bjornson.
Here.
James Walker will not make it tonight. Rick Weimholt. Here. Janice Hooker.
Here.
And I've seen Rick, Eric, Bill, and me for staff. And Chief Martin, are you? There you are. Okay, and Michael. All right. For staff. So, Chairman, you want to wait on Councilor Maxfield, or do you want to press?
Oh, let's go ahead and press. I mean, tonight we're going to receive the budget message and be released to review the budget. There's a couple of things I want to go over with everybody. Specifically, our discussion should not include estimates for appropriation amounts associated with any fund or line item, resource, or requirement. Questions of whether to fund specific programs or expenditures. Questions of whether to impose any tax levy or amount of levy. Any person may appear at this meeting and discuss the proposed programs and with the budget committee. I do want to start with that we do need a vice chair for the committee. And we should probably start with nominations and that vote.
Excellent.
So I'm assuming I can nominate?
You may.
Okay. I would like to nominate Ms. Bjornson, if she would like to do that.
I second. Councilor Hollett.
Melissa, did you accept?
Yes.
Do you have the time to do that? I wasn't sure of your time.
Yeah, I think I can do it.
Any other nominations? Okay, hearing none, let's call for a vote.
Okay. Councilor Porkham. Aye. Mayor Holston.
Aye.
Councilor Kenyon.
Aye.
Councilor Hollett.
Aye.
Councilor McClellan.
Aye.
Councilor Whitney.
Aye.
Councilor Maxfield, you come aboard yet? Hang on, I see you're waiting. Councilor Maxfield, can you hear me? You can hear me, Councilor Maxfield?
Here I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. So there was a motion to appoint Melissa Bjornson as the vice chair of the budget committee. And we're actually on the roll call, on the roll vote. If and we're down to you. Do you have a vote?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, for some reason it was saying that it was waiting for you to let me in, which I don't know why, but
I don't know why it's asking me, but yes, I'm having to admit everybody into this meeting, which is kind of three things at once.
Okay. Yes, you have my vote.
Okay. Yes. All right. Chairman Goldman.
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson.
Aye.
Ms. Bjornson.
Aye.
Mr. Weimholt. Aye. And Mrs. Hooker.
Aye.
Vote is unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would like to now have the budget officer go through the budget committee rules of procedure so that we all know the ground rules.
Do you have it in front of you? Do you have it in front of you? You can have it to me. You want to go through line by line? Do you want to summarize, or what do you want me to do?
Well, let's go through and Is just going through the high points okay with everybody?
Yes.
Sure.
Sure.
I sent it out unfortunately, just before the meeting started, but it's the same as last year, but I'll read through it.
I got it.
Basically, the meeting requires one person speaks at a time after recognition by the chair, members to share the floor, listen to other members, not to interrupt another who is speaking, be respectful to others when speaking, remain focused on topic being discussed, disagree with ideas, not the person or people, avoid criticism of staff or others, do not beat the topic to death, avoid too much repetition. The chair should participate in the discussion after the other members have had the initial opportunity for discussion. A committee is allowed to discuss an agenda item without the necessity of a formal motion being made by a member. Chair will recognize the city administrator for comment and input with respect to each matter on the committee's agenda before the final vote or other action by the committee. Robert's Rules of Order will mandate the conduct of the committee's meetings, the 10th edition. Decision-making and voting, seek a consensus. No consensus, seek compromise. When voting, majority rules. Formal vote for all actions, decisions by the Budget Committee. Conflict of interest means a direct or indirect interest and shall include all pecuniary benefit to any member of the member's immediate family, employer, or the employer of any member's immediate family, and also may include a situation where the committee member, by reason of his or her interest, is placed in a situation of temptation to serve his or her own personal interest instead of the public's. Question of whether a member should be disqualified from voting on a particular matter shall be decided by a majority vote of the members present, except for the member who self-reported. Members should self-report a conflict of interest on a particular matter. Committee member may challenge another committee member of a possible conflict. Meeting days, I gave you a rough schedule. Those will be tightened up as we go along. The notices will be posted no later than 3 days before a regularly scheduled meeting on the bulletin board and the other locations in the bank and the post office, banks and post office. Quorum is a simple majority. If unable to attend, committee members shall notify the city administrator prior to scheduled meeting. Non-quorum meeting will include discussion only, no vote. Agenda, city recorder will prepare an agenda for each meeting, provide a copy to the city administrator. Recorder will provide a copy to each member prior to the start of each meeting. The agenda shall include the following format: a call to order, members present, quorum, minutes of the previous meeting, old business, new business, next agenda items, and adjourn. And then there would be a rules and procedures adopted by the Budget Committee on March 31st, 2020. Signed by the chair.
So do we have a consensus on the rules?
Aye.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Any nays? Okay.
All right, thank you. Does anyone want to declare a conflict of interest at this time?
I need to
Oh,
sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Chrissy.
I actually wasn't the one that said it, but I'll go ahead and declare.
Sorry, you came up on my screen.
Oh, sorry. I have a potential. My husband is in the fire department union bargaining agreement.
Okay.
I have a potential conflict. My husband works for the Oakridge PD.
All right.
And then I have a potential conflict of interest. My brother Rick Zelstra works for the city.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so it's going to be difficult for me to see people raise their hand who want to speak. I recommend that if we're speaking all remotely, that you state your name before you speak so that it's part of the public record. And we'll just kind of referee it as we go along. I guess whoever yells loudest gets to speak first. All right, so why don't we get into it? We're two citizen committee members shy tonight. We still have one open position, so if you know anybody who's interested in serving on the budget committee, please get them to come forward. Without further ado, let's move on to the budget message. Brian, if you're ready to go.
I am. So we sent out the budget message. Was there any committee member that did not get the budget message?
Did it change from the printed version?
No, it's unchanged.
Okay, then I've got it.
Okay, I am not going to read that verbatim. What I am going to do is provide a briefing on the overview.
Oops.
And with that, I'll proceed and then I'll offer a chance for questions and discussion.
Okay, carry on.
Did you want questions now, Brian, or did you say you're going to review it?
We'll go through the brief, and then if there are questions, I can.
Okay.
We can go from there. Okay, to break this out, what I want to demonstrate here is our current operating budget revenue versus expenditures. So this excludes enterprise and restricted funds. In other words, water, wastewater, stormwater, OIP. This is kind of basically the general fund and the EMS fund, or the two funds that we're looking at. So if you look at revenue and expenditures within those funds, there is a shortfall annually of $550,000. That's a problem. So that's our budget bogey. And to put that in context with relative to where we are, that budget bogey equals 51% of our property tax revenue we get each year. So to dive further into the revenue, if you look at where that goes as a percentage, it's laid out there. Property tax 34%, fees, permits, fines 30%.
I can't see that, Brian. Is that something that's in the?
I'm sorry?
Is whatever you've got on the wall in this packet?
Oh, I'm sorry. My fault. Hang on just a sec. I'll just share the screen. How about now?
Okay.
Much better, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
So there's the first slide I was talking to about the revenue versus expenditures. Give you time to absorb it since it wasn't.
Does that? I can't read any of the numbers, but I'm wondering, does this graph tell us how the property taxes are divided up?
No, all this is telling you is that our expenditures exceed our revenue by $550,000.
Oh.
And that $550,000 is the equivalent of 51% of our entire annual property tax revenue. Kind of give you perspective on how big that number is with regards to this city.
Yeah, so you're referring to strictly the EMS fund right now, is that right?
General and EMS, the
Oh.
kind of the daily operating funds. And remember, general includes the police, the library, others.
Right.
So to move on to the revenue, to break down the revenue on where it comes from, property tax is 34% of our total revenue. Fees and permits and fines is 30. Charges for internal services is 13. Federal and state allocations is 22. And then all other is just a mere 1%. And again, this doesn't include the restricted enterprise and grant revenue. So to dive into the expenditures, as you can see, the lion's share of expenditures comes out of our paying for our personnel, our 22
Can you go
FT.
back? Can you go back one slide?
Yep.
You're muted, Chrissy.
Brian,
Yes, ma'am.
can you go back to that first slide with the
Very
revenue?
first slide. Okay. That one.
No, the second one.
That one?
Yes. Where does EMS revenue show up?
Is that Billy? Where does EMS revenue show up? Ambulance revenue? Fees, permits, and fines.
The blue.
The blue? Okay.
Yes. Service fees is what it's actually called.
So ambulance is considered fee?
It's considered a fee, yes, a service fee collection.
Okay.
Okay, for expenditures, again, 60% of our expenditures are in personnel. In other words, the 22 FTE, the volunteers, and the part-timers that we utilize each year. The 40% is materials and services, which is essentially everything else. It's going to be from paper to gasoline to insurance, casualty insurance, contracts, that kind of thing. And to go into the personnel costs, in particular, the percentages on what encompasses a fully burdened cost for an employee, of which the average is $126,900 within those funds. That's what after you pay for the employee's retirement and all that, the average cost is $126,900 for an employee. So wages and overtime is 63%, health insurance is 17%, retirement's 18%, workman's comp is 2%. So the question is, how many employees does the city have? They have 22 FTE because they have some part-time people. But remember, these employees are just the ones within, the average cost is just the ones within EMS and general fund. Is that correct? Yeah.
Well, do we have any employees that aren't in those two things?
All of our public works employees
Are not in this?
are not in this average fully loaded cost,
Okay.
the average. But the breakdown of where as a percentage of what you're paying for with each employee remains relatively consistent as far as the percentages.
Right. Okay.
Hey, Brian,
Yes.
could you email these slides to us?
Yes, after we're done. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
If you didn't hear it, that number at the bottom, the 126.9, it's an average of 16.8 FTE is kind of what's in those two funds. That's what the average is.
And we'll eventually get to where we're looking at the average cost for public works employees, correct?
No, because they're pretty much paid for by their quarter revenue. It's not, to me, I'm trying to bring out the real issue here. As we get further along, you'll see it. But we can answer that question at the next meeting if you're interested in that when we're done here.
Okay. No, I was just poking the bear.
So this is kind of a status quo budget, if you've noticed, but it cannot remain that way. So I'm looking at options for ways to reduce our expenditures or increase our revenue. To increase revenue, essentially, you can levy a public safety tax. We can bill, and a public safety tax, in this case, I had met with the assessor, and given where we are as far as compression, we could generate an additional $400,000 without, going into compression, and basically that's about a $19 per property taxpayer per month. Yes.
Brian,
yes.
when you say public safety levy tax, are you talking about an actual levy or are you talking about property tax increase?
It's a local option tax, which means it doesn't, the basic property tax is fixed with the exception of a 3% increase each year, up to a 3% increase. This is a local option levy where you tell the public, we're going to fund our public safety organizations with this. And it's a 5-year increase, at which point it expires.
Okay, and it can be rolled for another 5 years if you choose to. I mean, if you
If
vote
the public
on it.
chooses to,
Yes,
yes.
if the public chooses to.
Is
Okay.
this something that would go to a vote?
Yes, have to go to the ballot in November. The second option is a bill for non-transport EMS. After looking at it, we'll go after this, but it's really a small number. We're estimating maybe 20,000 because many of the non-transport visits are not covered by Medicaid, Medicare. So it would be a small number that we would gain from billing for non-transport, but still something we should go after to help in the end.
So do you see this as a positive benefit when it comes to the actual cost of creating the bill against what you're collecting?
Well, now we don't, I mean, right now all we bill for is transports.
Right.
So what we would do is when there's a non-transport EMS call, we would just click we bill through a systems design, which is our billing agency, and we would direct them to bill for non-transports, and they would send them a bill. And at this point, again, some of them will get denied, others won't pay. With the collection rate we have, that's why we're coming up with the estimate of about 20K, but that's a really squishy number.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know Medicaid is not covered, but Medicare does cover this.
Right.
I have a question about the public safety levy tax.
Yes.
You said that we could generate potentially 400,000 per year, correct?
Correct.
And would that go to both the EMS and the general fund as you're speaking about right now, or would that go to EMS?
It would be go towards EMS and police line items. It wouldn't go anywhere else. It would just be EMS and police line items.
Okay, thank you.
But the police are embedded in the general fund.
Right.
Yeah, but this shortfall right now is primarily EMS.
Brian, how do you determine that, considering all of the money that goes into our taxes is supposed to be divvied between police, library, parks, and EMS?
How do I determine what?
That EMS is the one that's short. Does that make sense?
Did you hear that, Dawn? Did you hear Bill?
Apparently not.
Okay.
No, we can't hear Bill at all.
Okay, so the answer is that it's easy to say it's EMS because they earn their own separate fund, so you know exactly what their shortfall is each year. The police embedded within the general fund, we can somewhat pull it out, but it's not quite as clear cut. So we can tell you essentially what they cost each year.
So I actually pulled a bunch of numbers out of the police department today, and revenue that's specific to police is only $230,000, leaving them short $918,000.
But haven't we always known that the police does not have a big revenue base like the fire department used to have? Because didn't they used to be the cash cow years and years and years ago? So I think some of this is just based on historical ways we've done things.
I guess the only point I'm trying to make is I'd like to know how the tax revenue is divvied up between those 4 departments that are supposed to be receiving it.
So, go ahead.
I was just saying I would agree.
Okay, we'll try to clarify the question first. Do you understand, Bill? So let me ask you, for the next meeting, we'll field that question in detail. If you would further clarify it and send it to Bill.
I will. I've got it all written out.
Okay, that's perfect. All right. Next is kind of the standard byline of we continue to encourage tax-paying entities to the city, but we've seen its limited success so far. So to look at how to decrease expenses to meet the shortfall, basically you're decreasing the scope of services you provide with these entities. So in effect, such as OPD, the police department, you would come down on your manpower, which would directly impact the number of hours per day that the police department can provide police protection on an active basis. They'd still be a standby basis where they're on call. And it's kind of a real stat. I mean, you can take one patrolman down, or you can take more than that, but it comes to a point where you got to you balance that against the hours per day that you have police coverage. For admin, you can reduce some personnel expenses there. If you're going to do that, my proposal right now would be to go to a 0.5 FTE with the city administrator, and go to 0.5 FTE on the assistant planner and the assistant recorder, one position. That would have its impacts. Less work would get done, and it would take longer for us to produce things. And if that was chosen, I would elect to try to go to a single council meeting a month instead of two, to save some effort. And to move on to the next one, the fire department.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt. I caught the CA, but what was the other position that you were recommending?
The assistant recorder, assistant planner position. It's one position that we'd go to a 0.5 FTE instead of a 1.0.
Okay.
Lastly, the fire department, not as simple as the police department, where you take away manpower and you just kind of dial down the coverage. We have an ASA to support, and our current manning at the fire department with full-time firefighter paramedics is what it allows us to do that. We really cannot go below that on a continuous basis and continue to support the ambulance service area. So to reduce the scope of the fire department, that would be asking to hand the ambulance service area back to Lane County. Expected ways they would deal with it are a couple after in discussion with folks. One, they could outsource it to someone like West Lane Fire, a commercial entity that does that. Two, they could possibly make the other ASAs sort of consume what is now ASA 7, our ambulance service area. So it's a really significant motion to take to reduce the scope of the fire department, because it's kind of an all or nothing thing when it comes to EMS. At that point, though, you could take the fire department down to perhaps 1 FTE with volunteer firefighters and to provide the fire protection for the city. Cities this size all over the nation operate on a volunteer fire basis like that. So those are kind of the...
Brian.
Yeah, I have something to say as well.
Sure.
Going back to going to half FTE for assistant planner and the CA position, do you have an estimate of how much saving that would be?
Yeah, next slide will get to it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this slide?
I have a question. What about the, what was that position that got added? I think the training position in the fire department was added maybe a year and a half ago.
Well, to make it all work,
Yes.
I intend to move Captain Higdon back to shift duty to reduce the amount of money we're paying part-timers. The number is just getting excessive. So there will be no more training position. It will be for firefighter paramedics on shift work.
Is that effective immediately or July?
Brian and actually Chairman, I don't think that we're supposed to be talking about individual cuts and things like that at this first meeting.
That's correct. So let's save that for when we get into the police and EMS budget.
Okay. Moving on. I promised the amounts here. It's probably hard to read. I don't know if it is for you, but I'll go through it. So these are kind of absolute amounts. In other words, they're all positive impacts. For the levy, there's the 400,000. Next down is reducing the fire department scope, which comes in right around 300. And understand these figures are soft because there's a lot of things you don't know, how it's going to impact the overtime, all that kind of thing. Reducing police department scope is there. the actual estimate. Yeah, right around 150. Yeah. Reducing admin department scope 70,000, closing the library about 22,000, and charging for non-transports 20,000. So those are kind of the major muscle movements we could take to try to address the bogey.
Isn't the library budgeted this year for 34,000?
Library budget for this year?
Yeah.
34.3. What's that?
It's 34.3 total requirement.
That's the number then. I was mixing it up with the transports. Okay.
And how come the parks aren't on this?
Say that one more time.
The parks, are they not on this possible offset list?
What's the offset?
Well,
Well, I guess we should hold that one as well for the next meeting.
Yeah, let's wait till we get to the Parks tab.
Okay, so wrap up slide, difficult decisions remain. Since I've been here, we've started cost-cutting measures, within the operating budget that I have. The levy's a temporary solution, likely citizen pushback, but talk to the assessor and his experience. You are going to do a local option. A public safety local option is the one that sells best to your citizens, as opposed to just a straight, we're going to raise taxes for 5 years to pay in the general fund. If you abandon the ASA, there'll be significant service degradations to the citizens, I can guarantee you, because the ambulances are either going to come from somewhere else and the call time is going to be longer, or they possibly might use the Oakridge firehouse as a station if it's a commercial entity, but in which case maybe not so much. But in any case, that's going to take some time to transition, so there will be degradations to EMS service within the city. Community is already dissatisfied with some case with the current level of police presence, and take away manpower is going to exacerbate that concern. So, but unfortunately, no decision is not an option. As I look back at budget messages in the past, the city was in a difficult time in 2012, and we're no better off today. And we're basically at a point where we really cannot continue to operate with this method for another year and a half. We will have used the capital that we have, and we've used as much water revenue and wastewater revenue as we possibly can to put toward this, and it's just not there anymore. So no decision is not an option. With that, I'll open it up for any general questions, not specifics.
I would like to ask where we're at with the WAC.
In what way?
I see that the budget lines out as if we're going to just keep the WAC running as it is, and I thought there was discussion of selling it.
Well, there was a discussion with St. Benny's a couple of years ago.
If you're talking about that discussion, we are starting to open up discussion with St. Vinny's again. I don't know if it will be a sale or a lease that they would be interested in, but they are very preliminary and we're not there yet.
Okay, I just noticed at the bottom of the first page of the budget message, it says, maintaining facilities and programs that cost significantly more than revenue generated or that generate no revenue, such as the WAC and junk amnesty. So is that something that we can talk about when we get to those sections about eliminating or something like that, or selling?
Yeah, I would say when we get to the community parks and community services discussion, future budget meeting, probably on the 14th, we would talk about that. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything specific to any of the budget tabs, just leave until we get to it. Right now, if you have any questions about the budget message, let's entertain those. And I would also recommend that if you have any additional questions after tonight, since you've basically received the budget, and if you have specific questions, please email them to Brian so that they can be addressed and he has time to address them rather than blindsiding the people in the meeting.
Right. I do have one question. This is Kathy. I just
Yes.
would like to, I'd like to
Go ahead.
clarify any loans that we have out, like in our water. Is that reflected in the shortfall? Is that part of the shortfall, or is that something that is just in a different silo?
Now, the water, like the IFA loans and the
Yeah.
such, they're all in the enterprise funds, and they're already accounted for with the revenue that we pull in from the water.
Okay.
So we're required to carry that debt service of 120%. We do that, and then our first payment is due in December for the IFA loan,
Okay.
but it's all coming from water revenue, so not really into the brief that I just gave you.
Okay. Thank you.
And Brian, do you want to summarize capital outlays that we have in the message?
Get the message. Right, so capital outlays, kind of breaking news here after this was published, but the well number 8 has turned up sour, so that will not be an option. We're still gathering information from the city engineer on what the way ahead would be for that. It just didn't have enough output. It wasn't tainted. It just didn't have enough output as they got down to, I think it was 250 feet.
That's the test well, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Was that
So
at
that-
Green Waters Park?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. So the likely alternative is going to be to charcoal filter the well that we shut down because of the contamination. Put a charcoal filter on it and keep it and make it clean water, and we'd be able to use that. But that's just a preliminary. We still have to go through the process with the engineer and figure out what the most cost-effective way to get additional water source.
So, I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse here, but have we ever got any firm numbers on what it would take to treat the surface water that we have?
Not accurate numbers. I mean, you can look at what other people pay to process surface water, and it's a pretty large capital outlay of in excess of $1 million, I believe, to process the surface water.
Right. But I think we're already approaching that outlay with what we're doing with these wells that aren't working.
And I think we're moving into conversation that is council conversation and not budget committee.
Okay. Well, I put it on the radar.
Okay.
Yes.
To get further into the capital outlay, we are going to look at using some OIP money to further extend the utilities, water and sewer through lots 20 and 25 to make them more saleable or leasable. And that's somewhere around $176,000. A big thing that's coming is, you know, that the wastewater fund, wastewater treatment has kind of deferred maintenance for a long time, and we need to do some significant improvements to the wastewater plant. One of them being a washer compactor, which takes a lot of risk out of the system that we're currently using to get rid of our waste. So we're looking to try to fund that. We've also have the IMBA grant we're trying to execute by August, which we should have that grant money in hand by May, at which point we can start building. As long as we're well underway, I see no problem with retaining that grant and finishing the projects. Additionally, on the street fund or street grants, we had a small city allotment grant that expired this year, and that was the Berry Street grant for $50,000. the estimated project, I think, was in excess of 200 to fix Berry Street.
Right.
So we've closed that grant out because there's no way we're going to execute it in time. The second, and you're limited at any one time to 2 small city allotments. The second one was a $100,000 grant to fix Garden Street. That still has a year left. So my intent is to proceed with that project on Garden Street, reapply this summer for Berry Street again, because the actual amount that you would get now in the current age is 100K. So it comes a lot closer to meeting the delta there to repair Berry Street.
So what's the total cost for Garden? Because you gave a cost for Berry, you said the
Garden's around 130,
okay.
and we have 100 in a grant, so that leaves us chasing 30 to fix the street. And I hate to see 100, and that expires next year. I just hate to leave $100,000 laying on the table, given the city condition.
I agree.
And do you have a plan for that?
A plan for?
For the 30,000?
Yes, we're going to borrow it from the water fund, and it can be a capital improvement loan, which you can repay in 10 years, over 10 years.
Okay.
Any other questions on capital outlay?
I'm not sure where my question fits in because I don't see capital outlay in here.
In the budget message?
Yeah, but in the personnel expenses section at the top of page 3,
right,
there's a line that says, due to our recent mishap rate. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, we had an employee that was in an accident that was not his fault, but it still goes against our insurance bills. And so our risk level has gone up because of that accident. And so it drives up the rates of our insurance, goes along with that.
When you say drives up, like dollar-wise, how much is that?
For next year, how much? Well, I'm not saying that's entirely due to this accident, but next year our insurance is expected to increase 30 to 50%.
Wow. For the whole city, everything that's being insured.
Right. That's liability, that's property, that's everything. Okay, workman's comp part of it. So, but if you look at that, if you remember that chart that I showed you, workman's comp really is a small sliver, but it's still going up 30% because of primarily because of that.
So workman's comp is going up 30%.
Right.
So I'm a little confused. Normally in like car insurance, we are talking about a car insurance issue, right?
No.
No, we're talking about workman's comp because the individual that was hit was injured, and so it's affected. They've been gaining. All the expenses were under a workman's comp policy. So that drives up
I
premium.
see. Okay.
Any other questions overall on the budget message or the brief?
Can you kind of brief tourism recreation activities?
Well, relative to the budget message, what we really talked about was the IMBA grant, which, if you want to hear that in detail, the feds were able to hand that over to ODOT. ODOT is now in the middle of making that transfer. Once the ODOT has the money of the $160,000, they will tell the city, and the city will proceed with the project on a reimbursable basis up to $160,000 to finish it off. And the goal is to have it done by August, September.
And what is the project?
RTMP and TRT. It's a discussion for the council next week, but we would expect that given the current situation, those revenues will go down. Don't know for sure yet, but that would be the expectation. And we're developing a new process to allocate TRT funds and how that will happen within council. So we'll kind of drive how that gets allocated to and to whom in the community.
Okay.
And we probably will get into it a lot deeper in the Parks and Community Services, who kind of is the recipient of much of this stuff.
Sounds good.
I have another question, Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
In administrative overhead, I noticed that we went back to applying that to almost all of the departments. What was the reason for that?
So I'm glad you brought it up because I intended to talk to it, because we did do a major shift in the way the administrative overhead is managed. You recall in the past couple of years, it truly was just a method to pull money from the water fund and the wastewater fund and get it to the general fund so they could augment EMS and police. And it was not fairly allocated. So the staff did a very thorough job of figuring out what the manpower distribution was amongst all the different funds, as far as how much effort it took the admin department to manage each of those efforts from the funds, and they determined the allocation across all funds. And so now they're, in our mind, they're being charged a fair overhead admin for the services that they use within the admin department. And even the fire department, who before had zero admin overhead because they were operating in the deficit, they are budgeted for admin overhead this year because it's the right thing to do.
No, that's a good approach, man.
Yeah, it feels like it's more transparent.
Yes, and from Bill's point of view, all the departments within the general fund are also getting their fair share of admin allocation, depending on how much time the admin department is spending on managing their programs.
Right. Right. I wanted to know if we'd be able to see what that schedule is, or what the I guess
yes,
maybe it's a percentage.
We will hit it on the 14th. Bill will give a presentation on how the allocation, or how the laydown went on admin overhead.
Okay.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
Will we have access to budget to actuals this year for budgeting?
I'm sorry, say that again. The phone was ringing.
Will we have access to budget to actuals for this budget committee?
So you're asking for last year's budget actuals? 19-20
year to date, or last year, or which one?
This fiscal year that we're currently in, the things that our auditors told us that we should have to do a good budget.
You've been getting them monthly since about December.
Yes, that would
be. Yeah, the second meeting of council meeting of every month, you get budget reports, expenditures versus projections.
Yeah, that would be a good report.
The budget committee doesn't get those.
That's true.
And I don't think we got the audit message either, did we?
Yes, we did.
We'll
Budget committee?
on the next go round, we will provide the citizen members the copy of, so everyone has the same report. Is that okay with you, Mr. Chairman?
That is okay.
Okay. One last thing to mention, and the chairman kind of mentioned it, but if you do have questions, please email them to Bill, and what he'll do is summarize them and schedule them to be addressed at the right meeting at the right time, and give you a kind of a thoroughly researched answer. So please give your detailed question to Bill so he knows what to on after and provide you. Any other questions on the message or the brief or the budget you have in front of you? Over to you, Mr. Chairman.
All righty. So is there any other business that we need to take care of today?
There's a public comment, and I see a handful of non-budget committee members. So If you're there, I would encourage you to come off mute and speak your question if you have one.
And please state your name and address before you start your question.
Crickets, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All righty then, if no one's opposed, I suggest maybe we adjourn this meeting and move on to the next one. Yes.
When is our next meeting?
April 14th.
When is our calendar, Brian?
On April 14th.
Thank you.
And will this be a remote session or physical?
We're expecting remote because I think we'll be in the same spot with COVID.
Okay.
Will this next meeting be at 6 p.m.?
Let me check with Bill. I want to make sure I got it right. 6? Yeah. Now scheduled for 6 unless the committee wants to have it at some other time.
Is everybody comfortable with 6 p.m.?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for dialing in this kind of interesting time in our lives here with COVID and making it work online.
All righty, folks. If anything else, then we're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
night.
Good night.
Good night.